Elena Vasquez stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of their tiny bathroom, her dark eyes filled with disbelief. The conversation she'd just had with her father echoed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. At 26, she had never imagined her life would take such a dramatic turn. "You will marry him, Elena. It's our only option," Roberto Vasquez had said, his weathered hands shaking as he delivered the news that would change everything. The debt was crushing. $50,000 owed to the Blackwood family, money borrowed. During her mother's final illness 3 years ago, Roberto's small auto repair shop had failed during the pandemic, and now the Blackwoods were calling in their marker. The terms were simple, but devastating. Elena would marry Thomas Blackwood, the family's disabled son, or they would lose everything. Elena walked back to the kitchen where her father sat hunched over their small table, looking older than his 55 years. The morning light streaming through their apartment window seemed harsh and unforgiving. "Tell me about him again," she said quietly, pouring herself coffee with trembling hands. Roberto looked up, guilt written across his weathered face. "Thomas is 32. He was injured in a farming accident 5 years ago. The family says he needs care, companionship. They think a wife might help him." "What kind of injury?" "I don't know the details. His sister Victoria handles most of the family business now. She's the one who proposed this arrangement." Elena felt her stomach clench. She was being traded like livestock to care for a man she'd never met, to a family that saw her as nothing more than a convenient solution to their problem. First glimpse of the Blackwood estate 3 hours later, Elena found herself riding in her father's old pickup truck toward the Blackwood estate on the outskirts of town. The property was vast, with rolling hills covered in crops and several large barns dotting the landscape. The main house was a sprawling colonial structure that spoke of old money and established power. Victoria Blackwood met them at the front door. She was a tall, elegant woman in her late 30s, with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her blue eyes were cold as winter ice as they assessed Elena from head to toe. "Miss Vasquez," Victoria said, her voice cultured and dismissive. "How nice to finally meet you." The house interior was impressive but felt sterile, like a museum rather than a home. Victoria led them through rooms filled with expensive furniture and family portraits, finally stopping in what she called the sitting room. "Where is Thomas?" Elena asked, finding her voice despite her nervousness. Victoria's expression tightened slightly. "He's resting. The accident left him with significant limitations. He tires easily and prefers to avoid social situations." "Like to meet my potential husband before we discuss any arrangements," Elena said firmly. A look passed between Victoria and Roberto. Elena realized this had all been planned without any input from either her or Thomas. The thought made her anger flare. "Of course," Victoria said smoothly. "Though I should warn you, Thomas can be quite withdrawn. The injury affected him psychologically as well as physically." The meeting 20 minutes later, Elena heard the sound of someone approaching slowly down the hallway. Thomas Blackwood appeared in the doorway, and Elena's first thought was that he looked nothing like what she'd expected. He was tall and lean, Elaine with dark brown hair that needed a trim and intelligent green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He moved carefully, favoring his left leg and using a walking cane, but there was nothing pitiful about his bearing. If anything, his careful composure suggested strength rather than weakness. "Miss Vasquez," he said, his voice deep and slightly. "Rough, I understand you've been told about my family's proposal." Elena studied his face, looking for signs of the limitations Victoria had described. What she saw instead was intelligence, wariness, and something that might have been resignation. "I have," she replied. "And I'd like to hear your thoughts about it." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly, and for the first time since entering the house, Elena saw genuine surprise on someone's face. Victoria started to speak, but Thomas held up a hand. "Perhaps we could talk privately," he suggested. "Okay, the garden is pleasant this time of day." A walk in the garden, Thomas led her through French doors onto a stone terrace that overlooked beautifully maintained gardens. Despite his careful movement, Elena noticed that he seemed more at ease outdoors, away from the oppressive atmosphere of the house. They walked slowly along a gravel path lined with roses and flowering shrubs. The October air was crisp and clean, and Alina found herself relaxing slightly for the first time since this ordeal began. "Tell me honestly," she said as they paused beside a fountain. "Do you want this marriage?" Thomas leaned against his cane, studying her face with those perceptive green eyes. "Do you?" I asked first. He smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Fair enough. I want independence. I want to be seen as something other than a burden or an object of pity. If marriage to you accomplishes that, then yes, I want it." His honesty was refreshing after the careful manipulation she'd endured all morning. Alina found herself looking at him more closely, noting the way he carried himself with quiet dignity despite his physical challenges. "What would you expect from me?" she asked. "As your wife?" "Companionship," he said simply. "Someone to talk to. Someone who sees me as a person rather than a collection of medical problems. And in return, you'd have security, a home, freedom from whatever financial pressures brought you here." Alina was quiet for several minutes, absorbing his words. There was no deception in them, no false promises or romantic illusions, just honesty, which was more than she'd expected. "What's your family like to live with?" she asked finally. Thomas's expression darkened. "Difficult. They mean well, but they see me as an eternal child who needs constant supervision. They'd likely see you as another caretaker, at least initially. And how do you see me?" "I see someone who's brave enough to consider marrying a stranger to save her father. Someone who asks direct questions and expects honest answers. Someone who might be willing to take a chance on building something real from something arranged."
Out the decision as they walked back.
Toward the house, Alina found herself studying Thomas more carefully. There was something about him that didn't quite fit with Victoria's description of a dependent invalid. The way he spoke suggested education and intelligence. His questions were thoughtful and perceptive, and there was something in his eyes that hinted at depths his family might not even know existed. "I have one condition," she said as they reached the terrace. "Name it." "I want to understand exactly what my role would be, what's expected of me, what my rights are, how the household functions. I won't walk into this blind." Thomas nodded. "That's completely reasonable. Victoria will have documents prepared." They found the others waiting in the sitting room, tension thick in the air. Victoria's perfectly composed expression faltered slightly when she saw them returning together. "Well?" she asked. "We've agreed to proceed," Thomas said calmly, "assuming the terms are acceptable to everyone." The next hour was a blur of legal language and formal arrangements. Alina would move to the estate within 2 weeks. She would have her own room initially, with the understanding that she and Thomas would determine their living arrangements as they became comfortable with each other. She would receive a monthly allowance for personal expenses, and her father's debt would be forgiven upon the signing of the marriage certificate. As they drove home in gathering dusk, Roberto finally broke the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the estate. "Are you sure about this?" Alina considered the question. Was she sure about marrying a man she'd known for 2 hours? About moving into a house where she'd be seen as little more than hired help? About giving up any chance of finding real love? "Think Thomas and I understand each other," she said finally. "We both know what this is and what it isn't. There's something to be said for that kind of honesty. He seems different than I expected." Different how? Alina thought about Thomas's intelligent eyes, his thoughtful questions, his hint that there were complexities to his situation that his family didn't understand. "Stronger," she said, "more aware. There are depths there that his family doesn't see." Preparations the 2 weeks that followed passed in a surreal blur. Alina quit her job at the local grocery store, packed her few belongings, and tried to prepare herself mentally for a complete change of life. The hardest part was saying goodbye to her small circle of friends, most of whom were shocked by the sudden announcement of her engagement. Married to who? Her best friend Carmen had gasped. "Alina, I've never even heard you mention this guy. Did you explain that you were marrying someone to solve a debt problem? How did you tell people that your entire future had been negotiated like a business transaction?" "It happened quickly," Alina said simply. "His name is Thomas Blackwood." "Blackwood? As in the farming family?" "Alina, they're rich." What does he want with someone like us? The question stung because it echoed Elena's own doubts. What did Thomas really want from this arrangement? And what would happen when he realized that she was just an ordinary woman with no special qualities to offer? The wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday, a simple civil ceremony with minimal witnesses. Lena bought a simple cream-colored dress and tried not to think about the wedding she'd once dreamed of having. On her last night in the apartment she'd shared with her father, Alina sat at their small kitchen table and tried to imagine her future. In less than 24 hours, she would be Mrs. Thomas Blackwood, living in a mansion, married to a man who was still largely a mystery to her. "Are you nervous?" Roberto asked, settling into the chair across from her. Terrified, Alina admitted, but also curious. There's something about Thomas that doesn't quite fit with what his family says about him. I have the feeling there's more to him than anyone realizes. Good or bad? Lena thought about the intelligence she'd seen in Thomas's eyes, the careful way he'd spoken about building something real from their arranged beginning. I guess I'll find out soon enough. The wedding day Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzly, which seemed appropriate for a wedding that felt nothing like the celebration Alina had once imagined for herself. She dressed carefully in her cream-colored dress and the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, trying to look like someone worthy of joining the prestigious Blackwood family. The ceremony took place at the county courthouse with minimal fanfare. Thomas wore a dark suit and moved with his usual careful precision. Victoria was there, along with a younger man Alina assumed was another family member, and Roberto stood beside her, proud and heartbroken in equal measure. Judge Martinez performed the brief ceremony with professional efficiency. When Thomas slipped the simple gold band onto Elena's finger, she felt the weight of her new reality settle around her like a cloak. "You may kiss the bride," Judge Martinez announced. Thomas looked at her questioningly, and Alina nodded slightly. His kiss was gentle, brief, the kiss of a stranger who was trying to be respectful. There was no passion in it, but there was kindness, and that felt like enough for now. After the ceremony, the small group gathered for lunch at an expensive restaurant downtown. Victoria made polite conversation about household arrangements and social expectations. The younger man, who turned out to be Thomas's cousin David, was charming and conventional. Through it all, Thomas was quiet but observant, responding when spoken to but volunteering little. Alina found herself watching him, trying to understand the family dynamics. It was clear that Victoria was the one in charge, making decisions and speaking for Thomas as if he weren't capable of representing himself. Lena was beginning to suspect that Thomas Blackwood was far more capable than anyone in his family realized. Arriving home after lunch, it was time to say goodbye to Roberto. The moment Alina had been dreading had finally arrived. "This isn't goodbye forever," she whispered as she hugged her father tightly. "This is just goodbye for now." "Be happy, Mia," Roberto whispered back. "Find joy wherever you can." Thomas waited patiently while she said her farewells, then helped her into the black sedan that would take them to her new home. As they drove through the gates of the Blackwood estate, Alina realized that everything familiar was now behind her. Everything ahead was unknown. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked quietly. "Ask me in a month," Alina replied. Thomas smiled. "Fair enough." The house looked different now that she was arriving as a resident rather than a visitor. Larger, more imposing, less welcoming. Victoria met them at the door with her practiced smile. "Welcome home, dear," she said, though the words sounded rehearsed. "Ah! I've had the blue bedroom prepared for you, down the hall from Thomas's room." Close enough for convenience, but with adequate privacy. The blue bedroom was beautiful, furnished with antiques and decorated in shades of pale blue and cream. It was larger than Elena's entire apartment had been, with its own sitting area and private bathroom. Someone had unpacked her suitcases and arranged her few belongings in the closet and drawers. "I hope you'll be comfortable," Victoria said. "Dinner is served at 7. We dress appropriately for dinner in this house. It's nothing too formal, but we do maintain certain standards." After Victoria left, Alina sat on the edge of the elegant bed and tried to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. She was married. She lived in a mansion. Her husband was a virtual stranger who used a cane and seemed to harbor secrets that his family knew nothing about. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Thomas entered carefully, closing the door behind him. He looked around the room with what might have been amusement. "The blue room," he said. "I wondered where they'd put you. It's beautiful, but it's also as far from the family quarters as possible, while still being on the same floor." Victoria's. A way of making sure you understand your place in the household hierarchy. Alina looked at him sharply. "And what place is that?" "Somewhere between family member and hired help. You're my wife, which gives you a certain status, but you're not one of them." "Not really." His honesty was both refreshing and disturbing. Alina found herself studying his face, noting again the intelligence that seemed to radiate from him. "Thomas," she said carefully, "I want you to know that I meant what I said during our first conversation. I see you as a person, not as a collection of limitations. Whatever your family thinks or assumes, I'm going to form my own opinions based on my own observations." Thomas moved to the window that looked out over the back gardens. When he turned to look at her, there was something new in his expression. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just relief. "And I want you to know that I see you as someone who deserves respect and consideration, not as someone who's here to serve my family's idea of what I need. We're in this together, Alina. Partners, even if we're not lovers." It was the most direct conversation they'd had yet, and it felt like a beginning. It's not of love, perhaps, but of something equally valuable: understanding, alliance, the possibility of genuine partnership. "I should let you rest and settle in," Thomas said, "but I hope we can talk again soon. Really talk. There are things I'd like to share with you when you're ready to hear them." After he left, Alina stood at the window and looked out over the grounds of her new home. Somewhere in the distance, she could see workers moving between the barns and fields. This was a working farm, she realized, not just a wealthy family's estate. And somewhere in this complex operation, Thomas had a role that his family seemed determined to minimize. As she prepared for her first dinner as a member of the Blackwood family, Alina made herself a promise. She would observe everything, question everything, form her own judgments about the man she'd married and the life she'd chosen. Whatever secrets Thomas was keeping, whatever truths his family refused to see, she was determined to discover them for herself. The adventure was just beginning. First night, Revelations Elena's first dinner as at Blackwood was an exercise in careful choreography. The dining room could have seated 20 people, but the family gathered around one end of the massive mahogany table like actors performing a well-rehearsed play. Victoria presided with regal authority, discussing the upcoming harvest festival and various social obligations. David, Thomas's cousin who lived on the estate, shared updates about market prices and equipment maintenance. Thomas ate quietly, occasionally responding when directly addressed, but otherwise remaining outside the family dynamic. Alina watched the interactions with growing unease. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a performance where everyone knew their lines except her. "Alina, dear," Victoria said during a lull in conversation, "I've arranged for you to meet with our estate manager tomorrow morning. Mr. Henderson will explain Thomas's daily routine and medical requirements." Alina felt Thomas tense beside her, though his expression remained neutral. "What exactly will my responsibilities be?" Victoria's smile never wavered. "Primarily ensuring Thomas takes his medications on schedule, helping him with tasks that might be challenging, providing companionship. Mr. Henderson can explain the specifics." "And what about Thomas's preferences in these matters?" Alina asked. "I assume he has opinions about his own care." The silence that followed was deafening. David exchanged a glance with Victoria, who looked momentarily flustered. "Thomas understands his limitations," Victoria said finally. "He knows we only want what's best for him." Of course, Alina agreed. "But I'd still like to hear his thoughts on how our daily routine should work." Thomas set down his fork deliberately. "Actually, I've been managing quite well on my own for several years now. I take my own medications, handle my personal care, and spend most of my time on projects that keep me occupied." "What sort of projects?" David asked with obvious surprise. Alina caught the slight hesitation before Thomas answered. "Research mostly. Agricultural innovations, market analysis. I've been studying sustainable farming techniques." It was smoothly done, deflecting attention, without lying outright. But Alina sensed there was much more to Thomas's daily activities than agricultural research. Midnight discoveries that night. Alina lay in her elegant bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Curious, she slipped out of bed and cracked open her door. Thomas was moving carefully down the hallway, fully dressed and carrying a laptop bag. He disappeared down a staircase Alina hadn't explored yet. After a moment's hesitation, she grabbed a robe and followed. The house was different at night, filled with shadows and moonlight streaming through tall windows. Alina made her way carefully toward the back of the house, where she could see a faint light coming from what appeared to be a study or office, through the partially open door. She glimpsed Thomas seated at a large desk, multiple computer monitors glowing around him. His fingers moved quickly over a keyboard, his posture alert and focused. Whatever he was working on required intense concentration. Alina retreated quietly, her mind racing. The man she'd seen tonight bore no resemblance to the limited invalid his family described. His movements had been sure and purposeful, his attention completely absorbed by complex work that clearly challenged him intellectually. Morning conversations. The next morning, Lena found Thomas on the terrace where they'd first talked, a cup of coffee and newspaper beside him. He looked up as she approached, his green eyes bright with intelligence. "Good morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Well enough," Alina replied, settling into the chair across from him, "though I'm still adjusting to how quiet it is here." Thomas smiled. "It takes some getting used to. City has a different rhythm entirely." Alina studied his face, noting the slight shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd been up late. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Last night I heard someone moving around the house. It got me thinking about your daily routine, your projects. I have the feeling there's more to your life here than your family realizes." Thomas went very still, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. For a long moment, he seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "What makes you think that?" he asked finally. "The way you carry yourself? The intelligence I see in your eyes? The fact that you deflected David's question about your projects yesterday?" Alina leaned forward slightly. "Thomas, I married you without really knowing you, but I'm observant. And what I observe doesn't match what I've been told about your limitations." Thomas set down his cup and looked out over the gardens. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. "Alina, what if I told you that everything my family believes about my capabilities is based on outdated assumptions? What if the accident that supposedly left me dependent and limited actually became the catalyst for me to build something they can't even imagine?" Alina felt her pulse quicken. "I'd say that changes everything. It would change everything. For both of us. Then why haven't you told them?" Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Because they don't want to." "No. Because admitting I'm capable of independence would mean admitting they've been wrong for years. Because the family dynamic works better with me in the role of the damaged son who needs their protection." Alina felt anger building in her chest. "That's horrible. That's reality. My family needs me to be helpless so they can feel necessary. They need me to be grateful so they can feel generous. They need me to be limited so they can feel superior. What about what you need?" Thomas turned to look at her directly. "What I need is someone who sees me as I actually am. Someone who understands that I've been building a life they know nothing about, creating possibilities they can't imagine." Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Meet me in the East Barn tonight at 11. And Alina, don't mention this conversation to anyone else in the family. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because what I'm about to show you will change everything. And once it's changed, there will be no going back." The East Barn revelation that evening, Alina could barely concentrate during dinner. Victoria discussed upcoming social events while David shared updates about equipment repairs, but Elena's mind was entirely focused on her upcoming meeting with Thomas. What was he hiding in the East Barn? What had he built that his family knew nothing about? At 10:30, she slipped out of the house and made her way across the grounds toward the cluster of farm buildings. The East Barn was larger than the others, and as she approached, she could see lights spilling from the windows. Thomas was waiting for her at a side entrance, his expression serious but excited. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. Alina nodded, though her heart was racing with anticipation and nervousness. Thomas led her inside, and Alina gasped. The barn had been completely transformed into a sophisticated technology center. Multiple computer workstations lined the walls, each with several monitors displaying complex data streams. Server racks hummed quietly in one corner, and a wall of screens showed what appeared to be financial markets, agricultural data, and satellite imagery. "Welcome to my real office," Thomas said quietly. Alina walked slowly through the space, trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't the setup of someone with limited capabilities. This was the command center of someone running serious business operations. "Thomas," she whispered, "what is all this?" He moved to one of the workstations, his fingers dancing over the keyboard with practiced ease. 5 years ago, after my accident, I was stuck in bed for months while I recovered. Everyone assumed I was finished, that I'd never be productive again. But I had something they didn't realize: time and motivation. The screens around them came alive with charts, graphs, and data streams. I started trading commodities futures, using my knowledge of agriculture and weather patterns. Then I expanded into technology stocks, foreign currency markets. I developed algorithms that could predict market movements based on agricultural cycles and climate data. Alina stared at the displays showing profit and loss statements, investment portfolios, and trading positions. The numbers were staggering.
8.
"Much?" she asked breathlessly. "As of this morning, my personal net worth is approximately $12 million. Alina sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed. "$12 million? Thomas, you're rich. Why are you living like this? Why let your family treat you like an invalid?" Thomas leaned against his desk, studying her reaction carefully. "Because the moment they know about this, everything changes. They'll want to control it, manage it, take credit for it. They'll find ways to make it about them instead of about me, proving I'm capable of independence. But you could leave. You could buy your own place, live however you want." "I could," Thomas agreed. "But I've been waiting for the right moment, the right partner, the right reason to reveal what I've built." Alina looked up at him, beginning to understand. "And now I have a wife who sees me as more than my limitations. Someone who might be willing to build a future with me based on who I really am rather than who my family thinks I should be." Growing attraction over the following weeks, Alina found herself drawn into Thomas's secret world. He taught her about commodity trading, showed her how weather patterns in South America could affect grain prices in Chicago, explained the complex algorithms he'd developed to predict market movements. More importantly, she discovered the man. Behind the careful and valid persona he maintained for his family, Thomas was brilliant, funny, passionate about his work, and surprisingly romantic in quiet moments when they were alone. Their relationship began to shift from convenient arrangement to genuine partnership. Alina found herself looking forward to their late-night conversations in the barn, their walks through the gardens when the family wasn't watching, the stolen moments when Thomas would brush her hand or smile at her in a way that made her heart race. One evening, as they worked side by side analyzing market data, Thomas reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind Alina's ear. The simple gesture sent electricity through her entire body. "Alina," he said quietly, "I need you to know that this marriage may have started as a business arrangement, but for me, it's becoming something much more." Alina turned to face him, her pulse quickening at the intensity in his green eyes. "For me too," she whispered. When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like their careful wedding kiss. This was passionate, desperate, full of weeks of growing attraction and emotional connection. Alina melted into his arms, finally allowing herself to feel the desire that had been building between them. "I want to be a real wife to you," she murmured against his lips. "Not just a companion or caretaker, a real partner in every way." Thomas's response was to kiss her more deeply, his hands tangling in her hair. As months of careful control finally broke down, whatever limitations his family saw in him, there was nothing limited about the passion and strength in his embrace. Family confrontation 3 months into their marriage, Alina had settled into a double life that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. During the day, she played the role of dutiful caretaker, attending family dinners and social events where Thomas was treated like a fragile child. At night, she worked beside him in the Hidden Technology Center, learning about international markets and helping manage investments worth millions. Their relationship had deepened beyond anything Alina had dared to hope. Thomas was not just brilliant and successful. He was tender, passionate, and completely devoted to her. They had become true partners in every sense, and Alina found herself falling deeply in love with the remarkable man her husband really was. But the deception was wearing on both of them. Victoria's constant supervision and condescending management of Thomas's care made Alina increasingly angry. The family's refusal to see Thomas's true capabilities felt like a willful blindness that was becoming harder to tolerate. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Alina overheard Victoria on the phone with someone she referred to as Dr. Morrison. "Yes, we need to discuss adjusting Thomas's medications," Victoria was saying. "His new wife seems to be encouraging him to be more active, and we can't have him overexerting himself. Perhaps something to help him remain calmer, more manageable." Alina felt ice form in her stomach. Victoria was discussing sedating Thomas to make him easier to control. She was literally planning to drug him into compliance. That evening, Alina shared what she'd overheard with Thomas. His reaction was immediate and decisive. "It's time," he said grimly. "I can't let them do this anymore. We're telling them everything tonight." The big reveal Thomas called a family meeting for 8 o'clock that evening. Victoria, David, and several other family members gathered in the formal living room, clearly expecting another discussion about Thomas's care or household arrangements. Alina sat beside Thomas on the sofa, her hand in his for support. Feel the tension in his body, the years of frustration and suppressed anger finally reaching the surface. "I've asked you all here because there are some things about my life that you don't know," Thomas began. "Things I've kept private because it seemed easier than fighting your assumptions about my capabilities." Victoria frowned. "Thomas, dear, what are you talking about?" Thomas pulled out a tablet and connected it to the large television screen on the wall. Financial statements, investment portfolios, and business documents filled the display. "Talking about this," he said calmly. "For the past 5 years, while you've all been managing my life and treating me like an invalid, I've been building a business empire worth over $12 million. The silence in the room was deafening. David leaned forward, squinting. At the screen, Victoria's face had gone completely white. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You don't have access to that kind of money. You can barely manage your daily routine." Thomas stood up, his movement sure and confident. The careful fragility he usually displayed for his family was completely gone. "Can't manage my daily routine because you won't let me," he said, his voice stronger than Alina had ever heard it. "You've spent 5 years convincing yourselves that I'm helpless so you could feel important. You've infantilized me, controlled me, and made decisions about my life without ever asking what I wanted." He clicked to another screen showing the sophisticated technology center in the East Barn. "This is where I've been spending my nights for the past 3 years, trading commodities, developing investment algorithms, building the financial independence you've been telling me I could never achieve." Victoria stood up shakily, her composure finally cracking. "But your doctor said the accident damaged your heart, affected your cognitive abilities." "The accident was 5 years ago," Thomas said firmly. "My heart healed, my mobility improved, my mind was never damaged. But none of you bothered to get updated medical evaluations because you preferred the version of me that needed your constant management." David was staring at the financial statements with obvious shock. $12 million? How is that possible? Thomas smiled grimly. "It's possible when you combine agricultural knowledge with data analysis and pattern recognition. It's possible when you have the motivation to prove everyone wrong about your capabilities. It's possible when you're not being sedated into compliance." Alina squeezed Thomas's hand, proud of his courage and strength. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, brilliant, determined, and finally ready to claim his independence. Victoria's breakdown. Victoria sank back into her chair, her perfect composure completely shattered. "I don't understand," she said, weakly. "We were protecting you. We were taking care of you." "We're controlling me," Thomas corrected. "There's a difference, and it ends now." He clicked to another screen showing architectural plans and property listings. Alina and I are moving out. I've purchased a house in the city where I can run my business operations openly and keep the family farm, but you'll need to find another way to feel important. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Thomas, please, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of marriage, the pressure Elena's putting on you to be more than you are. Elena sees me as I actually am, Thomas said firmly. She's the only person in this family who's ever bothered to look beyond your assumptions and see my real capabilities. Alina stood up beside her husband, finding her voice. For 3 months, I've watched you treat Thomas like a child who can't make his own decisions. I've seen you plan his meals, schedule his activities, manage his medical care, and make choices about his life without ever asking what he wants. That's not love, that's control. David was still staring at the financial data. If this is real, if you really have this much money. It's real, Thomas said simply. Every dollar earned through my own work, my own intelligence, my own determination. The only thing keeping me in this house was the fear of having to fight for my independence. But Elena changed that. She gave me the courage to stop hiding. New beginnings. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in the foyer of their new home, a beautiful, contemporary house overlooking the city. Thomas had purchased it outright, along with office space downtown where he was establishing his investment firm as a legitimate business operation. The house was everything the Blackwood estate wasn't. Modern, warm, filled with light and possibilities. Thomas had his own office with multiple computer setups, but he also had a workshop where he was developing new agricultural technologies and a library where they could read together in the evenings. Any regrets? Thomas asked, joining her by the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city lights. Elena turned to smile at her husband, her real husband, not the careful invalid he'd pretended to be for his family's benefit. None at all. This feels like the beginning of our real life together. Thomas pulled her into his arms, and Elena marveled again at his strength, his passion, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world.
I love you, she whispered against his lips. Not the man they wanted you to be, but the man you really are.
I love you too, Thomas replied, his voice deep with emotion. You saved me, Elena. Not from my limitations, but from other people's assumptions about them. 6 months later, their investment firm had grown to manage over $50 million in assets. Thomas had been featured in financial magazines as an innovative commodities trader, and Elena had discovered her own talent for client relations and business development. They were partners in every sense of the word in business, in love, in building a life that honored both of their strengths and dreams. On their first wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Elena with a second ceremony. This one a real celebration with friends and colleagues who knew them as they truly were, as they exchanged new vows in front of people who saw them as equals and partners. Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them together. What had started as a business arrangement born of desperation had become the greatest love story of her life. Thomas wasn't the disabled farmer she'd been told to marry. He was a brilliant entrepreneur who'd been trapped by other people's limitations, not his own. And Elena wasn't just the poor girl who'd been traded to settle a debt. She was a strong, intelligent woman who'd had the courage to see beyond appearances and build something beautiful from the most unlikely beginning. They danced their first dance as equal partners. Elena knew that their real story was just beginning. Together, they would build an empire, a family, and a love that proved that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most ordinary arrangements. Their hidden depths had become their greatest strengths, and their love had transformed them both into everything they were meant to be. The farmer's secret had become their shared success, and Elena had never been happier to be wrong about first impressions.